The monster with a naginata came closer in his shiny golden armor and a merciless face, swung with a desire to chop off the head of the arrogant guy who dared to interrupt such a beautiful singing of his beloved. At the last moment, the effect of paralyzing the body ends, and the boy manages to turn his head, but after experiencing terrible pain, he loses his hand from the sharp blade of the naginata. His face expresses great shock, and tears of pain begin to come out of his eyes. The guys start to get up and realize that everything is not going according to plan. One of their comrades has already lost his arm, and things can only get more difficult. Getting up from the floor, they, trying not to panic, decide to resort to using their monsters and kill the damned warrior with a naginata. The guys stood opposite a warrior in shiny golden armor and nervously tried to summon their monsters. They were sure that such a warrior would not survive against a crowd of monsters and would fall. The swordsman warrior was calm and waited. He did not try to attack, but was patient and wanted to kill every monster that dared to interrupt their performance. 5 monsters stood in front of the armored warrior at once, and each of them had to attack the armored warrior. Each of the monsters that the group of students summoned on stage were quite weak, but against such a strong monster and in a crowd, one could try to win. Monsters began to surround the stink in armor and try to attack him from blind spots while receiving as little injury as possible. One of the monsters grabbed the warrior from the back, and the other ran up from the other side to grab his left hand and prevent him from attacking with a naginata. Kazuro looked at what was happening on the stage and seeing how the warrior was beginning to be surrounded, indicating that he needed to get out of the encirclement and heal from the attacks by using his sword power. The swordsman warrior heard that some guy was giving him such advice and was extremely surprised. A group of guys whose monsters attacked a warrior in armor were very annoyed by such statements from the guy, and helping the monster that they realized that the attempt with poisoning the meat was not successful and they did not eat it, but simply pretended to be poisoned. Kajuro notices that the monster of the knight's bride is standing aside and doing nothing. He starts shouting at her to use her ability on the monsters. Otherwise, her warrior will die, and then she will die. Kajuro forced the monster actress to accept his words and act. Having gathered herself and calmed her tender and vulnerable soul as an actor, the girl, after Kazuro's advice, begins to give out high notes with her voice, forcing her warrior to rise and fight, enhancing his abilities with her voice and the power of skill. The warrior, lying on the floor surrounded by a crowd of monsters, unable to move, begins to hear the beautiful voice of his bride, and her power begins to be transferred to the warrior, forcing him to rise and give battle to the monsters who dared to interrupt the performance. Having filled his body with the magical power of his beloved, he rose from under the crowd of monsters, throwing them in all directions with his naginata. Using such power, the armored warrior takes his power to a new level and lets out a loud roar to intimidate his opponent. Without a hint of regret or fear, the golden armored warrior cut one monster in half with a powerful blow from his naginata. His body is overflowing with power and mental strength after strengthening the bride. One of the monsters decides to try to attack the armored warrior from behind, using a quick attack without attracting attention, while he is distracted by other monsters in front of him. The monster of the girl in a military suit was stronger than the monsters of the other guys. Sensing the presence of another monster behind him, the warrior in golden armor begins to heal himself, using an incredible technique of doing a back somersault while jumping over the monster behind him. Everyone did not yet understand what had happened and watched the battle. The warrior who tried to attack the armored warrior from behind crashes into the mummy monster who was fighting the warrior face to face. Having jumped over the monsters and not allowing himself to be grabbed, the armored warrior dodged and prepared to strike. Finding himself behind those monsters that tried to attack him, the warrior in golden armor delivers a strong and accurate blow to another monster, who did not expect such a turn and loses his head. The mummy monster and the swamp monster fall to the ground without understanding how this happened. Kajuro begins to loudly support the warrior in golden armor, thereby surprising everyone that a person is rooting for a monster. The warrior in golden armor was also surprised, but tried not to be distracted and keep an eye on the other monsters. While a crowd of monsters tried to attack and kill the warrior in golden armor, another boy ordered his monster to attack the monster's girlfriend from behind, thereby provoking the armored warrior to become distracted or give up and die, sacrificing his life in place of his bride. While the warrior in golden armor fought against the monsters and tried to fight back using various techniques, He managed to kill the mummy monster and assess the situation and determine another target for attack. A warrior in golden armor notices that a monster is creeping up on his bride from behind and immediately decides to attack him. Running up and jumping over the monster, the warrior began to swing his naginata and kill the damned monster. A strong blow at an unexpected moment for the monster who wanted to attack the monster's girl led to instant death. The armored warrior pierced the monster's head with his sharp naginata blade, causing him to experience severe pain, as did the owner of the monster. All monsters and people were neutralized or killed. The golden armored warrior proved that his abilities were high and his sword skills were amazing. Such a warrior is a worthy opponent for a strong opponent. One of the attackers was still alive and able to fight, but the fear of the monster and the understanding that it is strong enough and even stronger than she expected begins to beg for mercy and try to crawl away. The girl was scared and felt that she had no chance against such a strong monster alone. The fear of imminent death appeared on her face. Tears appeared and cold sweat ran down her face. In the last moments of her life, she tried to figure out how to survive and do something. Seeing Kajuro, she began to beg to help her and save her, bowing low to the guy and apologizing for trying to poison them. The armored warrior came closer and prepared to deliver the final blow. Being next to her dead classmates, the girl was in despair and begged for salvation. Kajuro was relentless and was not going to forgive the attempt to kill him. If she intended to kill him without any regret, then she did not deserve mercy. Kajuro pretended not to hear her begging him to help and simply winked at her before dying. After a strong swing of the warrior in golden armor with his naginata, the girl's head was chopped off with a sharp maple. Kajuro did not feel pity and believed that there would be no mercy for any attempts to kill or maim him or his loved ones and friends. After such a strong performance from the monsters and fighting alone against a crowd of monsters, Kajuro stood up and began to applaud the monsters, showing his respect and courage for such talented creatures. The warrior and his bride stood ready and were not going to give in to some guy who supported them in battle. Kazuro, realizing that the monsters are quite strong, decides to activate his sword skills and prepares for the battle. The armored warrior is the most dangerous of them, but attacks from his bride cannot be ruled out, for they can inflict paralysis or enhance the skills of their warrior. Kajuro began to climb onto the stage, where a crowd of corpses of monsters and students lay. The warrior in golden armor came closer and prepared to attack the guy. Kajuro was ready for the attack and kept an eye on the monster's movements in order to react in time. The warrior girl began to sing a quiet song and cast some kind of spell. The warrior in golden armor was waiting for the right moment to attack and was very serious, and suspected that the boy did not just interfere in the battle, but observed and suggested, without even resorting to the help of his comrades. The boy began to feel strong magic around him. It was reminiscent of winding fog, blinding the enemy. This technique would have worked if the boy was not ready for this, but the premature activation of the skills of his swordsman of the highest rank blocks all weak attacks of the enemy. A warrior in golden armor, thinking that the boy is now vulnerable and will not be able to repel the attack, begins to attack him, running with a sharp naginata and smiling, confident of his victory. His movements were honed and perfected over hundreds of years of living as a monster. Such a monster was quite a difficult opponent. Kazuro, showing his disappointment, begins to summon his monster with a chainsaw, saying that it was in vain that they decided to attack him. Rolling up your sleeve and pressing the symbol on the saw's arm, a blue glow began to break out, from which a monster should appear. A strong monster with a chainsaw pops up unexpectedly for the monster in golden armor and repels the attack with its saw, causing the warrior to doubt his actions a little. He began to understand that the boy was much stronger than all those who attacked him combined. A huge monster with a chainsaw showed its power with its terrifying appearance and began to attack the warrior in golden armor with a saw. The warrior managed to put a block with his naginata, but he couldn't hold out like that for long, and he had to do something. The bride looked at the battle and did not know how to help him. Her strength was exhausted, and she needed to rest and gain strength to help her warrior. She was worried that the warrior wouldn't cope, and the boy would kill them. The strong attacks of the monster with a chainsaw forced the warrior in golden armor to strain all his remaining strength to protect himself and not allow himself to be pierced. He fought with all his strength and did not want to endanger his beloved. The warrior's bride in armor began to worry about her lover, but she did not have enough strength. She needed to help her betrothed and use reinforcement. The warrior in golden armor was at the limit of his strength and could not withstand the power of a huge monster with a chainsaw for a long time. Unable to bear it, feeling that he might lose his love, with the last of his strength, he tries to cast a strong spell, and singing a song about love, begins to create a spell. Her heart began to beat faster out of fear for the warrior in golden armor. Enormous power began to be released from the singing of the beautiful singer and fueled the abilities of the warrior in golden armor, giving him a chance to confront the monster with a chainsaw. The warrior begins to increase his strength and absorb the golden mana of his bride's enhancement. His face begins to become covered with veins from the great absorption of his beloved's power, and the power begins to grow. Overcoming the pain in his body, the warrior in golden armor begins to shout, intimidate, and try to repel the attack of the monster with a chainsaw. A warrior in golden armor, having overpowered a monster with a chainsaw, successfully throws away the saw with his naginata and frees himself from the protective stance. Now he can, thanks to his speed and increased strength of his beloved, attack. Ignoring the stunned chainsaw monster, the armored warrior tries to dodge past the monster and attack Kojuro with his naginata. Kojuro pays attention to this and, calling on his sword, stands ready. The warrior with the chainsaw did not understand how it happened that some monster weak for him could resist him in such strength. Imbuing his sword blade of the highest level with magical and powerful power, Kojuro prepared to repel the attack of the warrior in golden armor. He was absolutely confident in his actions and was not afraid to engage in battle. The sword exuded enormous power and intimidated the enemy with just the sight of it. Swinging, Kojuro tried to hit the armored warrior with his sword, but he managed to block with his naginata. The force of the blow was so strong that the warrior could not stand on his feet. No one in this city had ever seen such a fight on the stage of an open theater. The battle of so many monsters and scavengers was incredible and brutal. After being struck by Kazuro's sword, the golden armored warrior flew back and fell to the floor of the stage. He was shocked by the guy's power and began to realize that he couldn't stand it that easily. A warrior with a chainsaw stood next to the guy and did not interfere yet, but waited for an order. The warrior girl in armor was scared and worried about her betrothed. The warrior in golden armor was angry and filled with rage at such an impudent interference in their performance on stage. Lying on the floor of the stage, he wanted to take revenge on everyone who had somehow offended his bride and kill the arrogant people with their henchmen monsters. Kojuro began to raise his mighty blade above his head for the final blow, enhancing the characteristics of the sword and wanting to finally break through the defense of the golden armored warrior. He looked at the monster and thought that such a worthy warrior could join his collection of monsters, but for this he had to subdue him by breaking through his defenses. An incredible force fell upon the warrior in golden armor. After the blow, he was thrown to the side with his naginata broken in half. The blow also caused damage, causing the warrior to cough up blood. This seriously frightened the bride. The monster girl with acting talents and beautiful singing was very scared and feared for the life of her beloved warrior in golden armor. Her eyes and mouth were wide open in fear and surprise. Cold sweat ran down my face from fear. Looking at the badly wounded warrior, she could not stand it and began to run to him to help and restore his body. The stage actress and beloved armored warrior's abilities included buff and stun skills. She could heal the warrior constantly, and then it would be difficult to defeat. Kojuro understood this, assessing the enemy's skills before engaging in battle himself. Summoning his monster, a busty beauty, Kojuro orders his beloved warrior in golden armor to stop. The busty beauty agrees, and using her zither, begins to perform the melody with a stunning effect, not allowing her to move. The bride feels the influence of the abilities of the busty monster and begins to stop, feeling dizzy and weak. Her body could not withstand the abilities of the camp and begins to weaken. Her legs begin to give way, and she falls. Kojuro runs up to her in time and catches her, preventing her from falling. The monster actress was very weak, after so many attempts to save her warrior in golden armor, that she needed rest and recovery. Kojuro understands that thanks to such a beauty, it will be possible to try to subjugate a warrior in golden armor by breaking through his internal defense. Kazuro begins to pull the monster girl closer to him by the waist, and while she is weak, tries to provoke the armored warrior by trying to damage his defense. The girl was not yet able to fight off the guy. Kazuro took her hand and began to say various kinds of compliments, trying to attract attention and turn her attention to himself. The warrior in golden armor was very angry, and after a strong attack with a blade, he was weak and could not get up and fight. His wounds, both external and internal, were quite severe. Hearing how the guy began to pester his beloved, he only became angrier and wanted to kill the bastard. While the warrior in golden armor was rampaging and shouting all sorts of insults towards Kazuro, a monster with a chainsaw sat on the warrior, not allowing him to stand up, pressing him harder to the ground. Pulling the corpse of some monster towards him, he decided to have a snack, while Kazuro was busy attracting the attention of the warrior's bride. Kazuro began to say that he was much stronger than the warrior in golden armor, and could give the girl more than the pitiful warrior. By stroking the warrior's bride on the back, he only further provoked the monster in golden armor, but this was not enough to break through his internal defenses. Kazuro, it was necessary to act more radically. The armored warrior began to try to get up, but the monster with the chainsaw was too heavy and did not allow him to do this. Kazuro pulled the girl tightly by the waist with one hand, and with the other began to touch the bride's beautiful face, saying various compliments and trying to attract attention. The girl, after so many awkward actions, began to blush from awkwardness, and realizing that she did not want to endure this because she loved her warrior in golden armor, she decided to take action. The girl, having gathered her strength a little, decides to attack the guy, and freeing herself from his tender and strong embrace, tries to hit him with her sharp claws. Kazuro quickly stops her attempt by saying that the monster with the chainsaw will cut off the head of the warrior in golden armor if she hurts him or wants to kill him. The monster with the chainsaw lowers the loudly screaming saw near the warrior's head, and pressing the gas, begins to spin the chain on the floor, producing a loud and nasty grinding sound on the concrete. The warrior in armor began to scream and close his eyes so as not to see this whole nightmare, seeing that the boy was not joking, and that the monster was really approaching the head of his beloved warrior in golden armor with his loud and nasty roar. The girl got scared and stopped. She felt intense fear and realized that she could do nothing. Her hand stopped just short of touching Kajuro's neck. Sharp nails could simply cut the neck and kill the guy, but the realization that a loved one could die stops all attempts. Kazuro, with a slight grin, realizing that he had her under complete control, did not worry, and continued to resort to drastic measures to break the internal defense of the warrior in golden armor with the help of his dear bride. Her eyes began to cry, and her angry face was very irritated from the realization that she could do nothing. The girl was very beautiful and loved her beloved so much that she could harm him with her actions. She wanted to kill the boy with all her soul, but she couldn't. Kazuro stood with his arms crossed, showing complete confidence in his actions. He smiled and continued to show his respect and compliment the beauty. The girl, frozen in place without moving her hand to her neck, tried to fight her desire to kill the guy. The face was very tense, and tears came out in streams from the eyes. Kazuro looked into her eyes and decided to gently take her hand, moving it away from her neck and complimenting her on the softness of her skin. The girl's head dropped, closing her eyes. She stood there, realizing that she couldn't do anything, and endured everything that the boy wanted to do to her. Kazuro decided to wipe the tears from the beautiful and gentle face of the beautiful girl, showing his admiration for her attractiveness and trying to calm the girl down. This is quite a tender moment, and the warrior in golden armor should definitely react, Kazuro thought. The warrior, out of anger that the guy is touching his beloved's face, begins to flare up with anger and scream, begging the guy to stop. The monster with the saw continued to hold the saw nearby and, if the monster tried to rise, immediately cut off its head. Kazuro decides to do a very dirty act and, hugging the girl by the waist, bends her over and reaches out to kiss her face. The girl begins to understand what the guy is trying to do and gets very worried, realizing that he doesn't want this. Kazuro feels that if the monster sees the kiss, then its defense will definitely fall and it will succumb to absorption. Pretending that he was kissing the girl, having first turned her to the side so that the warrior would not see the kiss itself, he waited for a reaction and hoped that it would work. Kazuro's cunning act was very ugly, and he understood it, but the warrior's abilities would be very useful to him. The warrior in golden armor saw that the bastard began to kiss his beautiful beloved, and became very angry. His emotions were very stormy, and he felt enormous disappointment in himself that he could not save his beloved in any way. The warrior's defense fell after this, and Kazuro felt it. Without wasting any time, Kajuro begins to absorb the warrior in golden armor. A monster with a chainsaw, sitting on a warrior, eating the monster's leg, felt how the body of the warrior under him began to disappear, and he plopped down on the ground. All this time, Kajuro kept the girl's back to what was happening, and she did not know what was happening. Kajuro devoured the warrior in golden armor and was pleased, but now he had to do the same with the girl, so as not to be a scumbag in their eyes further, and then explain his intentions and apologize to them. The girl didn't quite understand what was happening, and why the boy pretended to want to kiss her. Having released the girl, Kajuro began to think about how to break her defense. The girl turns around and sees that her beloved warrior in golden armor has disappeared, and not a trace remains of him. She begins to ask Kajuro where he took her lover, and if he killed him, then she will do everything to kill the guy. Kazuro, listening to the girl's threats without answering anything, decides that if she is shamed, the protection will fall and he will be able to absorb her. While the girl did not understand anything and was at a loss, he took advantage of the moment and began to try to remove her outfit, thereby exposing part of her body. His perverted face showed great interest and desire to see a woman's breasts. The girl, realizing that the boy had completely lost all shame and was starting to undress her, she was very scared and did not understand what to do. Her eyes began to cry and her closed eyes showed only an unpleasant feeling in her soul. Kazuro began to pester him even more, trying to cause intense shame and weaken the beautiful girl's internal defenses. He began to pull his lips closer to her face and try to kiss her, saying all sorts of obscene things. He started talking about how they could have a good time alone without anyone bothering them. The girl, realizing what she was getting into, got very scared and started screaming, calling for help. Kazuro feels that the girl has given up and her defense is broken. He lets her go and says that everything will be fine now, trying well to calm the girl down. By using the absorption ability, Kajuro activates his powers. The girl begins to be absorbed, emitting a pink aura and forming another symbol on the guy's hand. Now these two will serve the guy together, and no one will separate them. On the stage, now only the corpses of the guys who tried to kill Kazuro and his comrades, and the stones of their monsters remained. Kajuro now owned another attacking monster, and a monster with new abilities that could strengthen all monsters, giving more power. These were pretty good monsters, and now you can be calmer having two warriors at once. After contemplating his achievements, Kazuro absorbs the chainsaw monster and the buxom beauty back into his body, and stands on the open stage, wondering what to do next and where to go. He begins to descend from the stage and feels something unpleasant. The soul of the warrior begins to rage and scream that as soon as he gets out, he will immediately kill the guy, showing his broken feelings and seeing what the guy did with his beloved. Kajuro begins to say that he did nothing wrong, and all his actions were to weaken the warrior's defenses for further absorption. Kazuro understood that the couple of lovers now felt great distrust and anger towards him for his actions. But Kazuro was a rather smart guy and thought about how to calm them down and convince them that everything was to save them and preserve the relationship, leaving them now together forever. A warrior in golden armor hugging his beloved shouted at the guy, showing his hatred for kissing and indecently touching someone else's lady. Kazuro began to make excuses, saying that he did not kiss his bride and only touched his waist, without opening his arms in front of him. The girl confirmed the guy's words and admitted that the boy really only pretended to want to do something, but only provoked the warrior. And she decided not to tell the guy's action after absorbing the warrior, blushing a little, for safety. The warrior in golden armor heard from his beloved that the boy did this only to save their lives, and so that they could always be together. He was surprised. Having thought carefully about what the boy had done for them, they agreed to such conditions, and were glad that they could always be together while continuing to perform. The warrior in golden armor promised to help in battles for decent treatment of them and their talent for theatrical acting. After such an interesting fight and the absorption of two monsters, the guys decided to go to the house where there was a group of guys who decided to poison them. Check if there were any provisions there and maybe something else. Walking inside, the guys came across food lying on the table and a box with stones of weak monsters. Poe held a bundle of meat in his hands and was glad that he could eat normally. Khan, having checked the food for poison, said that everything was safe and they could have a snack. Kajuro was very exhausted, and after the battle, he needed to rest and restore his abilities and gain strength. He yawned and stretched, showing his fatigue and desire to sleep. Beside him lay his backpack, in which he kept all his belongings. Kazuro decided to go outside, taking his backpack with him and telling the guys that he wanted to go outside to unwind a little and get some fresh air. Han was surprised that Kajuro, instead of sleeping, decided to go outside and breathe. Kazuro said that he would not be long and would return soon, but for now they could have a snack, since they would soon move on. Han looked at Kajuro and felt that the boy was growing stronger, and his aura was filling with new colors and increasing in size. Such power was quite dangerous even for the owner of so many monsters. Han was beginning to worry that Kajuro might lose control of the monsters and die. Kazuro, going outside, decided to sit at a table and take stones from his backpack to improve his strength and the strength of the monsters. It was quite light around from the cloudless sky and moonlight. Kajuro laid out the stones on a napkin. He summoned the busty beauty to improve her abilities and try to unlock new skills. Such a monster deserves attention and strengthening. Kajuro began trying to activate the stones and charge them with energy. The stones began to glow and rise as if by the magic of levitation. Kajuro sent a large amount of power at them and asked the buxom monster to absorb the stones. Now the girl's abilities will be enhanced and will be able to provide new skills for further use. The busty beauty, opening her mouth wide, began to absorb stones saturated with powerful power, improving the abilities and strengthening the monster. Her aura began to glow more intensely and slightly enlarge her beautiful body shape. The busty beauty was surprised that her breasts had grown so much, and felt awkward and uncomfortable that her breasts could fall out of the dress. Kazuro, embarrassed, tried not to focus on his large breasts and wanted to see how much the busty monster's strength had increased. Having discovered the characteristics of the monster, he began to check whether he had enough stones to activate a new skill. The points were enough to activate the skill, and looking at the busty monster, Kazuro realized that after all, the bra that he had given earlier would definitely not be enough now. After the busty beauty, Kazuro decided to increase the skills of another monster, and taking the backpack in his hands, the guy turned it over, pouring the remaining monster stones onto the table. A large number of stones can pump up the strongest skill of a monster, and Kajuro began to summon it. Having opened his red voice, Kajuro began to absorb all the remaining stones on the table, strengthening the skills of the red eye and allowing him to open a new ability. Having collected a sufficient number of stones, Kazuro was eager to test the capabilities of his half-monster. Having opened his eye, Kajuro became able to see through objects and walls. The power to notice the aura of monsters in dark places began to progress and turn into X-ray vision. It was very cool and useful. Now the guy will be able to see the enemy, no matter where he is hiding. Kazuro notices that if you look closely, you can see all the points of contact of power and the channels of the soul through which mana moves. This ability allows you to assess the enemy's strength reserve and the amount of strength for further battle. Kazuro was pleased with such improvements and rejoiced. Red Eye agreed with the guy and pointedly showed how strong and dangerous he was now. Such superior skills will not hide anything from the Red Eye when the enemy is in front of them. The ability to analyze the enemy's abilities speeds up the speed of action, and there is no need to wait and evaluate. You can now immediately attack knowing about the enemy's abilities using Red Eye skills. After some time, having had a snack and collected their things, the guys moved to the point they needed on the map, to the bank. They walked along a small path. There were only power lines and green hills around, hiding from the wind. The guys looked around and were always on the alert. Suddenly, some guys appeared in front of them in bandages and with many wounds. They ran and screamed in fear. Judging by the fatigue, this lasted quite a long time, and the guys were very exhausted. Kajuro pays attention and thinks that someone is following them. Running past, Kojuro manages to ask the guys why they were running like that and what happened. The guys, very tired, say that a crowd of monsters is chasing them, and they also need to run away. Kojuro, hearing that there was a whole crowd of monsters there, got a little scared and thought about it. Having decided to fight them, Kojuro and Fen ran towards the crowd of monsters with great pleasure. Fen took out his sharp blade and prepared for battle. When he saw that his comrades began to run towards the monsters, he got a little scared and asked to wait for him. Po didn't want to be left alone in a dark and dangerous city, but he was also scared to fight a crowd of monsters. The fleeing guys noticed that the guys they met, running away from the monsters, ran in the wrong direction, but towards a crowd of scary monsters. He started shouting at them to come back and run in the other direction, otherwise they would die. Kojuro and Fen were in the mood for a worthy battle and ran towards the crowd of monsters with great pleasure. Once on the bridge, a crowd of monsters appeared in front of the guys, and they continued to run without stopping. The monsters were of a weak wound, but there were dozens of them, and with their mere scream they scared ordinary people but not our guys. Fen uses his shadow monster in front of Kojuro for the first time and orders him to fight. The monster looked like death with a large and sharp scythe that cut through the enemy like a knife through butter. Fen did not lag behind and acted like a ninja, attacking from above with his sharp sword. Their attacks were coordinated and honed to perfection. They acted together and covered each other. Such a monster was very strong and capable of standing up to a crowd of monsters alone. Fen, covering his monster with filigree precision, throws his sword at the head of the monster that was trying to attack the shadow from the back. Kojuro, trying to keep up with Fen and his monster, summons his chainsaw monster and a warrior in golden armor to fight. A monster with a chainsaw offers a bet to a warrior in golden armor on whoever kills the most monsters wins. The warrior in armor reacted to such a proposal only with a grin, and simply said that we would check which of them was the more effective and capable warrior. Crowds of monsters moved towards our guys and did not feel any fear. The horde of mindless creatures only wanted to eat as many people as possible and did not pay Nina any attention. Their loud roar and aggressive attitude caused fear. Sharp teeth could tear flesh with one bite, and no one wanted to get caught by something like that. Kojuro, skillfully wielding his powerful blade, scatters monsters to the right and to the left. He sees how many monsters there are, and is happy that so many monster stones can be collected and sold on the black market, which may be enough to last him a long time as president. A warrior in golden armor and a monster with a chainsaw scatter small monsters with their moves and sharp weapons. There are only more monsters, and they keep coming and coming. The monster with the chainsaw takes notice of this and warns Kojuro to use a stronger attack and kill them faster. Kojuro, in the heat of a back-to-back battle with his monsters, hears the words of a monster with a chainsaw and wonders what to do. Remembering that one of the red-eye skills can kill a crowd of low-level monsters at once, he decides to use it. Kojuro begins to use the red-eye skill on the explosive ability of a group of low-rank monsters. He is overwhelmed with emotion and the desire to kill as many damned monsters as possible. The monsters approaching Kojuro begin to feel something strange inside themselves and stop, wondering. Something began to grow inside and increase the state of anxiety and pain. Kojuro, realizing what was about to happen, cheerfully showed his calmness and slight pleasure before seeing the result of improving his red eye. Kojuro snaps his fingers, thereby activating the ability. The monsters begin to fly into pieces, exploding and making large fireworks. Kojuro, seeing that he was able to defeat a large group of monsters with one ability at once, understands that it was not in vain that he improved the ability of the red eye to the maximum level. After such a battle, the guys stood in the middle of a bridge strewn with corpses and stones of monsters back to back. They defeated the crowd of monsters and were happy. The fat man stood behind with those guys who were running away from the monsters and were shocked to see such strong absorbers. There was a dead chaos on the street. Only the idling of the monster's chainsaw and the heavy breathing of everyone after the battle could be heard. Having finished the battle, the guys began to check their weapons and try to catch their breath. Po and the three guys stood in shock that his comrades were capable of such a thing. The guys were shocked to see such strong students taking part in the university competition and realized that they had no chance. They saw such brutal killings of monsters without any hesitation or fear. These were real maniacs. Kojuro and Han, looked like real serial killers, and they liked to kill. The guys were so scared, looking at such fearless warriors, that they didn't even notice that one of them was standing nearby and did not take part. They decided to ask Po why he didn't help his comrades. Po himself was scared, but decided to pretend that he was very strong in front of the guys, saying that such weak opponents were not worthy of fighting against him, and looked ominously at the boys. The guys thought that such strong absorbers would clearly be able to defeat the main monster, and began to applaud and thank Po for helping them by ordering his comrades to deal with the monsters. They were so scared and impressed that they believed every word of the chubby. After talking with the frightened guys, Po begins to run to Kajuro, experiencing pleasant feelings that he was praised and admired. Kazuro, collecting stones in his backpack, told Po not to play the fool, but to help collect stones and to get out of here quickly. The guys who thought that Po was in charge instantly realized that they had been deceived, and that he was just a burden who clung to such dangerous absorbers in order to level up. They were slightly surprised, but quickly realized that they had fallen for an obvious scam. Meanwhile, in the tallest building in the center of the closed city, there was a strong fog, hiding many things from prying eyes. At the entrance to the building, there was a guard standing and monitoring the surroundings. The building looked undamaged by the absence of people and was completely intact. On the top floor, the main monster sat on his throne in the company of his two beautiful companions. A skeleton approached him and, kneeling on one knee, greeted the ruler. It was quite cozy around, and there was harmony and comfort, just like among people. The head was sitting on a soft sofa and sipping a delicious drink and enjoying the pleasant company of his beauties. He noticed that a servant had come and wanted to tell him something. The lord was in a good mood, and he became curious about what the servant wanted to tell him. A servant, on his knees, came to report that the monsters who were sent to kill all the people who dared to enter the city of the Lord were killed by several absorbers. Also, several strong monsters disappeared from the theater stage. Apparently they were killed by absorbers, the servant added. The crowd of monsters standing in the room was a little scared that strong absorbers had appeared that were capable of killing a crowd of monsters without any difficulty. Some monsters were wondering what kind of absorbers were capable of doing this. One of the Lord's main servants, in an office suit and gold jewelry, offers to send strong monsters to capture those insolent people who dared to kill the master's slaves. His gaze was filled with the desire to fight with such absorbers, and asked the master to send him on this task. Behind the monster in an office suit stood another monster with a large mustache and smoked a pipe. He looked rather modest, but his impressive body showed that he was no ordinary servant. He also wanted to evaluate the abilities of the absorbers and look at them. The Lord agreed to resort to stronger monsters, but for now he did not plan to send his main thugs and ask them to wait a little and still check those absorbers. The fact that they were able to defeat an army of weak monsters is not enough to fight such generals, the Lord said. After the battle, the guys already walked further through the ruined city, and looking at the frightening things around them, such as an old corpse suspended from the frame of a billboard, and ominous sounds coming from all the dark corners of the city. Kazuro was grateful that they were not far from the right place. Seeing the bank building, Kazuro told his comrades that they were almost there and would get there soon. Nada will hurry, as it will soon be dawn, and Nada will be looking for a way out of the city. Kajuro, seeing the bank in front of him, really hoped that there would be money or some kind of jewelry there to pay for the treatment of Hanami's mother. Suddenly, the guys began to feel a slight trembling, followed by an explosion, and everything was covered in dust. The guys were a little scared and prepared for something unexpected. Poe said that it felt like someone had broken through the wall, and the guys, trying to see what was hidden by the thick layer of dust in the air, began to look closely. Kazuro begins to notice through a thick layer of dust, using the red eye skill, the silhouette of 3 large creatures with horns. They stood motionless and made angry sounds. Kajuro asked everyone to get ready and wait for the signal. The dust began to settle and 3 high-ranking evil buffalo monsters appeared in front of the guys. They were very fierce and ready to tear everyone to pieces. Kajuro began to sense their strong and evil aura. Realizing that they may not be able to cope with such monsters, Kazuro decides to come up with a plan. Fen also senses their strength and advises them to run away, otherwise they will die before they can do anything or even get to the bank. Such monsters have great strength and high speed, so they have little chance. The guys agreed with Fen and began to run away, trying to break away from the huge and ferocious buffalo monsters with bats. Po was too fat and did not have good endurance or speed. They will quickly catch up with this one and eat him up, thought Kazuro. Kajuro ran as best he could and glanced at Po. Po was very frightened and ran crying a lot, realizing that he could not escape. He held on to his backpack, which he hung over his stomach. Kajuro decides to help Po and save the fat man. Stopping quickly, he uses the red eye skill, which is capable of stopping any monster, but not for a very short time if the monster is strong. The skill makes you freeze in place and blocks all movements of anyone who falls under the effect of the red eye's power. The monsters began to feel very dizzy and stopped unable to move. They were strong enough and tried to break out of this ability of the boy's red eye. The monsters stopped, but when the guys ran out to the intersection, they noticed that everything was very bad. Po only got more scared and doesn't know what to do. Kajuro, seeing so many strong monsters, was also scared. The guys were surrounded. There were various monsters around, blocking the path in all directions. Even on the houses there were monsters with wings that could attack from above. The guys began to realize that they couldn't get out and would have to fight. Khan, realizing that they were trapped, decides to use a very strong skill and tells the guys to come closer and stay close to him. Kajuro, feeling a little fear, looked around when he heard Han's words and agreed in surprise. Khan, touching the ground, begins to call upon the most powerful ability of his monster, forming a huge shadow around himself, which only increased and spread across the entire earth for tens of meters. Po and Kazuro stood wondering how this would help them and watched what was happening. A huge dark shadow begins to grow and absorb everything that comes under its influence. The monsters around do not have time to notice how a huge, dark entity has appeared under their feet, blocking their movements. The shadow spread tens of meters across the entire intersection, blocking everything that came under its influence. Each of the monsters felt that they could not move and escape from the cursed black substance. While the monsters could not move, Khan said that they had to run, otherwise such power would not be enough for long, and the monsters would run after them. The guys rushed towards the bank as fast as they could, without looking back and stopping. He ran gasping for breath and begged himself not to fall exhausted and die. Kazuro ran past the monsters and noticed that they really couldn't get out and move their legs from the shadow of the monster Han. Such an ability was very powerful and strong against so many monsters. Po began to sweat and out of fear tried to run as long and as quickly as possible. He prayed all the way and really wanted to survive, running down the street. Houses and trees rushed around, but Po, not paying attention, simply ran as best he could. The guys were almost there and the main entrance to the bank appeared in front of them. The guys began to run inside and hoped that the monsters didn't see where they went and lost track of them. Having entered the middle of the bank, the guys collapsed and tried to catch their breath. They had never run so fast before. Po fell to the floor from fatigue and couldn't catch his breath, throwing off his backpack and throwing it next to him. Kajuro, leaning on his feet, also tried to catch his breath and hoped that the monsters did not have time to see them. After several minutes of trying to come to his senses and catch his breath, an old acquaintance, Kazuro, comes out of the corridor. He went out to check what the noise was at the entrance to the bank and who might have entered them. Seeing Kazuro, the boy was surprised and froze in place. They looked at each other and were not happy that they had to meet. The bespectacled boy remembered how Kajuro set him up in the exam before entering the university and was very angry with the boy. Kazuro remembered the arrogant bespectacled man who bullied him and his friends at school. The bespectacled boy began to ask how such a poor and weak absorber decided to take part in a competition between universities. Kajuro said he was lucky because he had strong teammates to help him. Po wanted to say that Kazuro was the strongest student at the university, but Kazuro interrupted Po's indignation and covered his mouth so as not to reveal all his plans. Kazuro asked why the bespectacled man was sitting in a bank and not looking for monsters to defeat. And why was he alone? Suddenly, 3 guys with very serious faces and extremely unfriendly attitude towards uninvited guests emerged from the shadows of the corridor. One of them was dressed extremely provocatively, with a huge chain around his neck and glasses. The other one had a scar on his face, and their leader was just a jerk and said he didn't like anyone coming into his building without asking. The bespectacled boy without waiting for a command from his group commander, decides to teach the uninvited guests a lesson himself, and, insulting Kajuro, offers to fight for a place in the bank. Kazuro, having heard such a proposal, decided to agree and clarified whether the bespectacled man really wanted this. The bespectacled boy reacts indignantly to such arrogant words from Kazuro. He rolls up his sleeve and shows that with 2 mid-rank monsters, he can handle an upstart like Kajuro. Kajuro, without showing emotion, calmly rolls up his sleeve, exposing his hand, on which the bespectacled man sees many signs of high-ranking monsters and is very frightened that his eyes are already popping out of their sockets. After what he saw, the bespectacled man became very tense and began to regret that he agreed to the duel. The bespectacled boy, seeing so many monster marks on Kazuro's hand, couldn't believe his eyes and began to assume that he was a swindler and was deceiving everyone that he had so many monsters. Kazuro, not paying attention to the bespectacled man's words, decided to go further along the corridor and find the safe where the money was kept. The leader of their group was not happy to see strangers and decides not to let Kajuro through, saying that he is a nobody and he has no business coming here. They were the first to occupy this building, and if they want to stay here, they will have to fight. Kazuro and Han agree to a duel, and with great pleasure teach the arrogant students of the Mao-Chi Supreme Devourers University a lesson. While the guys were getting ready to fight, a red eye suddenly pops out and begins to tell Kajuro that something is wrong here. He feels the approach of a very large and strong mana from the street. Red Eye sensed that very strong monsters were approaching the bank building very quickly, and among them was a monster of the highest level. It was a horde of high-level vampires with their leader, a monster with a pipe and a beard. A very powerful magic wafted from him, and a battle with so many strong monsters would not be easy, and he would have to retreat. Kazuro, realizing that it will soon be very difficult, decides to retreat without attracting attention and leave, leaving the bank to those students. Po and Han were surprised, and did not understand why Kajuro suddenly changed his mind and refused to fight. 3 strong students of the Mao-Chi Supreme Devourers University were surprised, but agreed to let the guys leave without a fight, feeling their superiority over the arrogant guys of the Fufel University. The bespectacled boy did not miss a moment to gloat over the upstart Kazuro and show his guesses about the rogue Kazuro and his unfair battles. Going out into the street, Kazuro hurried the guys and told Po to urgently summon the garbage can monster. A crowd of strong monsters were approaching here and they couldn't handle it, so he took the guys away from the bank. Po, hearing without any questions that strong monsters are coming here, begins to summon his trash can monster. Kajuro asks Po to hurry up and sit very quietly. The boys began to climb into the trash can and hoped that the monsters would not be able to find them, due to the aura of the trash can monster, which hides it with its smell and abilities. Sitting in a trash can, the guys saw a crowd of monsters passing nearby and tried to be quiet. Afraid of giving themselves away, the guys began to sweat a little. Meanwhile, at the bank, the guys heard that there were a lot of monsters near the entrance, and the guys got a little scared. They began to prepare for battle and turned their backs to each other. A healthy man with a beard and a smoking pipe walked into the bank. Without looking up at the guys, he sensed their weak aura and was not worried about fighting against them. The head of the group of students orders everyone to summon their monsters to fight. They began to suspect that the bearded man was very strong if he controlled an army of monsters of strong rank. Kazuro, using the red eye skill, became able to see through walls and observe the battle of the students of the Mao-Chi Supreme Devourers. Po got worried and started asking if they had a chance. Kazuro and Han were a little surprised that Po decided to worry about their enemies and thought that the boy was too soft on battles between absorbers. Po replied that they had misunderstood. He just wanted those students to be able to kill as many monsters as possible so that we could enter the bank and finish off the remaining and weakened ones, and then take the money from the vault. Meanwhile, 4 students fought with strong monsters and were able to kill several, but their strength was already running out. Kazuro looked at what was happening and told the guys that those students were not so weak and were able to kill several monsters. Having received several severe wounds, the guys were very tired and understood that if they continued the battle, they would definitely not survive. The leader of the group invites the monster with the cigar to let them go, and they will do whatever he wants. The monster with the cigar, exhaling smoke and smiling, replies that they can only go to the world of the dead and begins to use his powerful magic of the highest level. Huge crosses began to form from the smoke, to which 4 students were chained by the smoke. They could not move and were trapped. The bespectacled boy was more frightened than anyone else and felt a very strong fear. A huge, bloody whip began to inflict mortal wounds on the guys. They experienced severe pain and screamed, realizing that this was the end. They could not resist such magical forces. The smoke began to clear and bodies fell to the ground. The bespectacled boy and his friend were lying on the floor with severe wounds. Some were already dead. The rest took their last breaths. The leader of the Mao Chi Supreme Devourers University student group was already dead with his comrade with a large chain around his neck and glasses on his face. A monster with a beard and a smoking cigarette stood sneering at his weak opponents and was upset that he didn't get to have enough fun. Kazuro, seeing that all the students were dead and had not killed many monsters, made the guy a little surprised that even such trained students of the strongest university, Mao Chi Supreme Devourers, were killed without any problems by that bearded monster. Han, listening to what Kazuro was commenting on while watching the duel between those guys and a crowd of monsters, notices that none of them owned weapons and could only fight with their monsters. Kazuro thought about it, because Han was right. Having their powerful sword and defense skills, and Khan has masterful sword skills, then they have a better chance of killing that group of remaining monsters and fighting the bearded one. Without thinking for long, Kazuro agrees with Hanam to attack the monsters using not only the monsters, but also fight themselves. The guys jumped out of the trash and decided to go to the bank. Po, sticking his head out of the tank, suggested not to interfere in their battle and stay in the tank, so that the guys would not worry about him. Han and Kajuro paid attention and, knowing that the software was weak, agreed. The bearded monster with a cigar felt a strong aura of the absorbers, who were not far away. The trash can hid their power so well that even such a monster could not sense them. Turning around after the fight, he looked towards the exit and told his monsters that a couple of tasty people who longed for death were waiting for them on the street. The monsters, licking their lips, did not make their master wait long and rushed out into the street. Having flown out of the door, the vampires, using their speed, began to approach the guys very quickly and with a great desire to kill them. Kajuro and Han were ready for the fight and waited for the approach. Khan fought his shadow monster back to back, killing the vampires with his bladed weapons and strong fighting skills. Khan masterfully wielded his sword and did not let the vampires even touch him. Kazuro, armed with his mighty blade and summoning all his monsters to fight, gave the command to them to fight and not let them kill him. The monster girls were very aggressive in the fight and were preparing to use their stun skills. The warrior in golden armor began to hold his naginata at the ready, and the monster with a chainsaw started his saw and attacked the vampires with a terrifying roar of the engine. The battle began, and all the monsters entered the fray using their fighting skills and magical abilities. The girls stunned the enemy, and the warriors finished them off, and thereby gave them a chance to win. Kajuro, keeping up with his monsters, attacked the 2 vampires with his powerful blade, and caused severe injuries and broke the monster's defenses. He did not give a chance to approach him, and was clearly stronger than them in strength. Having managed to help Kazuro in time, the busty beauty using her zither inflicts stun on the vampires, preventing them from moving and thinking normally. The chainsaw monster uses its ability to spin the saw and cut everything into small pieces at high speed, leaving no chance for the enemy. There were fewer and fewer vampires left, and those in the sky no longer knew what to use and how to fight such strong absorbers. They tried almost all their abilities and understood that they could not let their master down and lose. But there was one more way, and the vampires began to spin into a bloody whirlwind using their blood magic abilities. Bloody tornadoes began to appear in the sky, sucking everything into themselves and throwing them very far away. Against the backdrop of dawn, it looked very scary. Kazuro and Han were surrounded by bloody tornadoes and did not know what to do. Strong magic could simply suck them in and kill them, leaving the tornado without air inside. Suddenly, Po appears behind the guys with a trash can in his hands and shouts at them to get ready to jump inside. The tank monster, seeing the impending disaster, was scared and did not know whether he could cope. Po throws a trash can on their heads to cover them, and he runs to get there in time. The huge tornadoes were getting closer and closer to the guys, and there was less and less time left. Having opened in the air, the trash can began to fall, covering the guys with itself and Po in a very spectacular way, tries to get under the can and escape from the bloody tornadoes. Tornadoes began to hit the tank, beating it with various debris that had been sucked into it, but they couldn't lift the tank. The ability of a trash can increase or decrease its weight depending on the situation, and can withstand heavy loads. Po, smiling, says that they are safe for now and will be able to wait out the attack. Bloody whirlwinds hit the tank mercilessly and gradually began to disappear. Kajuro was surprised by the Baka's ability, and asked Po how long does such strong protection from the enemy's magical actions last. Po replied that it wouldn't take long at all. About 10 seconds they were completely safe. Khan draws attention to such a short period of validity and asks, "What will happen when the protection ends?" Showing your concern. Suddenly, after the bloody tornado stops, one of the vampires breaks into the tank and greatly scares the guys, taking them by surprise. Khan, quickly getting his bearings, grabs his sword and pierces the head of the vampire with it, who dared to scare them so much and pierce the garbage can monster. Without pity or respect for the monster, Khan kills him. After receiving the wound, the garbage can monster was forced to return back to Po and recover. The guys found themselves on the ground surrounded by other vampires and understood that the battle was not over yet. Considering that it is too dangerous for Po to remain among such monsters and he will not be able to do anything, the guys offer him to run away, and they will distract the attention of the vampires and fight. Kazuro and Han, standing with their backs to each other, fight with all their might and do not give the vampires a chance to inflict any damage on them. The guys' sharp blades are capable of cutting through monsters like paper. After such a fight, all the monsters were dead and chopped into pieces. Kazuro and Han stood a little tired and tried to catch their breath, looking around to see if there were any more enemies willing to fight. The bearded monster with the pipe felt that these two were much stronger than those 4 weaklings from the bank building, and decided to see if they could amuse him with a worthy battle and opposition to his magic. He inhales smoke from the pipe and releases it, forming a huge cloud of smoke. His ability was dangerous and hid everything that fell into the smoke. Kazuro and Han, seeing how they were enveloped in a thick smog of tobacco smoke, began to cough and try to collect themselves and not allow themselves to be attacked from their blind spots. Kazuro covered his mouth with one hand, trying to breathe, and was ready, looking in all directions. Khan stood behind and carefully tried to sense the enemy presence and act proactively. Kajuro begins to sense the enemy's presence using his red eye and tries to quickly turn around and attack the enemy. His confident actions were fueled by his phantom swordsman abilities and red eye skill, preventing his opponent from catching him by surprise. The bearded monster gets hit with a sword and is very surprised that the guy could see him in such a thick fog of cigarette smoke. He doesn't understand how this is possible. Kajuro looked at the bearded monster and showed his disgust for smokers. His eye glowed red, and the monster realized that this was the ability of one of the monsters, and all attempts to attack from an unexpected direction would be stopped. In an attempt to finish off the bearded monster, Kajuro holds out his sword, but the monster quickly disappears in a thick cloud of smoke. The guys continued to stand and control the approach of the enemy. Suddenly, the monster appears from above and tries to pierce Han's neck with his pipe, realizing that it is too early for him to interfere with Kazuro and tries to leave him alone. But Khan manages to dodge the attack of a bearded monster with a pipe using his fighting skills. The monster was very surprised here too, because all his attacks were even and did not cause damage to the guys. After dodging, Khan delivers a strong blow to the bearded monster's neck, and he begins to fall. His eyes showed great surprise and fear that he might lose to some students and even inexperienced absorbers. From the wound he received, the bearded monster, barely able to stay on his feet, tries to get away and heal his wound by resorting to magic. Khan, having dealt damage, tries not to lose sight of the enemy and monitors his movements. The monster was very surprised that the other guy was able to dodge hidden attacks and realized that he had underestimated the enemy and was in vain to attack mindlessly. Khan looked at the bearded monster, and using his sense of detecting mana, he could easily see the enemy without even making visual contact. Now the smoke began to clear,